You probably already heard about the auto render mode in Blazor since .NET 8. Now let's create a project with exactly that mode, because you probably also had maybe some issues with that thing. So let's dive deep in this tutorial. As you can see here, .NET 8 it is, no authentication, and we use the auto render mode. And as you can see, this means we have the Blazor server interactive render mode, server capabilities, and also the WebAssembly render mode in there. We use per page component, and also we include the sample pages because we will use the sample pages to show you something that is really interesting and where you have to pay attention to a lot, because you can really break your application with this render mode. Maybe you did that already. Now let's have a look at the Solution Explorer here. As you can see, we have two projects. The top one, let's say, is the server project, right? When you have a deeper look in there, then you see regarding the frameworks, we also have .NET Web API capabilities, for instance. So we could, for instance, create controllers there, right? When we right-click the project, then let's just add a new folder like controllers, and we right-click then here, we get the suggestion for a controller, and we can totally use this thing, right? It's not the case on the client, because when we have a look at the dependencies here and go to the framework, we only have Microsoft.NET Core app, but the controller web API stuff, for instance, is available in ASP.NET Core.app. This is one important information. You will see why in a second, because regarding the sample files here, we have the counter razor, and Microsoft really use that because it's really simple to use the interactive auto mode here. Let's just have a look. When this thing is open here on my other screen and we open the console and check this thing out, now pay attention here. The first thing you see when we go to the counter page is that a WebSocket connection is used. All right, so counter, and you see WebSocket connected to, and after a couple of seconds, you see that all the WASM stuff, the files, have been downloaded in the background. And as you can see here, this is really big, but when this is deployed, it should be significantly smaller. So let's reload now. And as you can see, there's no WebSocket information in there anymore, only WASM. Now this is great for the counter component, right? But what if you really want to get some data, really from a database, okay? Let's check out the other example they have here, the weather file, the weather component, let's say. Now, they used it here, this example, to showcase stream rendering, which is also really nice. But what if we would like to use that in a spa-like architecture, in a single page application, right? So what we can do here to simulate that, we can just move the weather component down to the client application. Now this should still work because we removed it from the server project. The page is still weather. We're still using stream rendering, although the component is now put or moved to the client project. This in the end doesn't really matter. The Blazor web app here doesn't care where the component is. It is important that you specify what render mode you're using. And in this case, since there is no render mode defined, we're using still static server-side rendering. Of course, I can already see the shaking heads. If you want to use the Blazor WebAssembly render mode, then you have to move it to the client project. But let's just restart the application and then go to the weather page. And as you can see, it is loading. We have all the beautiful stuff that stream rendering provides. But now, let's say we want to use a render mode here. So add render mode and then interactive WebAssembly. All right, now we restart the application. There we are, it's loading. It's the same, right? Same result, great. Now what about auto render mode? Interactive auto. Let's run this, and page reloading still works. First, we're using Blazor server here, and if you now reload the page, we're using Blazor WebAssembly, everything works. Now, why is that? Well, as you can see here, when you have a closer look really at the top of the page, what are we doing here? We're just using the page directive and the render mode directive. This is fine. We're not using anything else. We're not injecting any kind of services. We have no web API calls in here that may lead to some trouble if we use the auto mode, and that's why I want to implement that stuff and show you where the pitfalls are. All right, so the first thing really I want to implement here is a controller with an HTTP call. For that, we have to inject the HTTP client or an HTTP client here. Now for the client project, this might look like that. So builder services, add scoped, and then new HTTP client, and then in here we say base address is a new URI builder host environment base address. So this in essence configures everything in a way to get the real SPA-like architecture, right? You have this client project, as you know it from .NET 7 and before. You have the client project for Blazor WebAssembly. You want to make web API calls to a controller, which is then in the server project, and then you get some data back. So this is the configuration for our client. We injected the HTTP client. So now we want to use a controller on the server. So for that, first we have to enable controllers actually. Now to do that, in here we add builder services and then add controllers like that. All right, and down here we say app map controllers. Again, if you want to know, let's check out the tooltips here. You see add services for controllers to the specified iService collection. This method will not register services used for views or pages, so really just API controllers. And here we see adds endpoints for controllers, for controller actions to the iEndpoint route builder without specifying any routes. So with that, we are able to use all the endpoints of our controllers that we want to create. And now let's add a controller. I already added the folder here, and here now we say controller, and this shall please be an API controller, an empty one, and we call this thing the weather forecast controller. All right, beautiful. This thing is here. And now what I want to do is, in essence, just copy and paste the logic from the example weather forecast page. So in here, first a method, it's an HTTP GET, that's correct. Public async. And then task action result. I wanna return a weather forecast array actually. Now the class is not available anymore, but it will be in a second. Like that. Okay, and now for the body, let's go back to the client. And here, let me just copy this stuff and create another weather forecast class. Maybe right in here, please. I know this is not the perfect architecture here, not the perfect structure. We can change that. So here now let's add another class, new item, the weather forecast class, and we just paste this thing here and make this public again, like that. And when we go back to the, yeah, it's gone here, but of course we have to add the reference like that. And now we can actually copy this and go to the controller. And I will do a quick recap in a sec. And now these are our forecasts, and we return OK forecasts. All right, like that. So what I did here was really just create the controller, and I moved the class now to the client in a separate file just for a little bit of structure. And since when we have a look at the dependencies here, the server project has a reference to the client, and so with that we will kind of have to put all our models in there. Again, there's another way to do this, of course, with some kind of shared project, for instance, or if you want to use a clean architecture, got a video for that, then this is different as well. But I think this is sufficient for this little tutorial here. So we have our class now here, we have our controller there, and now for our weather component, we have to inject the HTTP client first, right? So here now I say inject HTTP client, HTTP, and now here we say the forecasts are await HTTP get from JSON async, and now we need the route and also the type, of course. So here now we have the weather forecast array, and regarding the route, we've got API weather forecast, right? So this is now the route of our controller here, this thing, API, and this here is just a convention for the name of the controller, so everything that comes before controller. One more thing I want to change is the render mode. So let's say we just use the interactive WebAssembly render mode and also without pre-rendering, okay? There are reasons why I'm doing it that way. So new interactive WebAssembly render mode, and with false we say please no pre-rendering, so nothing will be done on the server. We restart the application, it is rebuilding, and we get the result. Isn't that nice? I think this is already worth a like, don't you think? Maybe even a subscription, but let's take things slow. Subscription comes afterwards, but a like would be really nice. Thank you very much. Please hit that like button. Okay, so this works. We have the spa-like architecture. Okay, we have our controller, we have our component, we have our client project and the server project. Well, now let's try that with pre-rendering on, just for fun. We say true, restart the application. What's happening now? Jesus, we get an error. Unhandled exception, we cannot provide a value for property HTTP. There's no registered service of type system.net.http and HTTP client. The application wants to run this component on the server, pre-render everything. So render the whole stuff on the server, sends it to the client, and then render it again on the client. Well, this is pre-rendering, okay? And this means that when you inject the HTTP client here, I told you that in the beginning, you have to make sure that this thing is also available and registered on the server. Now, when we have a look at the program CS here, I don't see an HTTP client here. Do you? Nope. I know I'm scrolling very fast, but I can tell you there is no HTTP client here. And I actually don't want to register an HTTP client there. It doesn't make sense for me in this particular case. Why should I use an HTTP client to make a web API call to myself? It's that, no, I really don't think that makes any sense. So there's a better way. And why am I telling you this with the help of the pre-rendering? Well, in essence, the same stuff happens with auto render mode. So when we now go to our component and do this thing here, interactive auto render mode, again, pre-rendering set to false, because when this would be set to true, then we get this crazy error, but at least we see this error. And now let's just restart the application. Again, make sure auto render mode, but pre-rendering set to false, and we want to inject the HTTP client. And now you see the following. There's nothing there. When we check out the console, we see that we are now using the WebSocket connection and the WASM stuff is downloaded in the background. When I now reload the page, WASM will be used and everything works fine. But let me now again just remove everything we downloaded. So I just clear the site data, then go back to the console, reloading the page. There's nothing there. And even if we check out the terminal here, there's no error whatsoever. So in essence, you have no idea what's going on there. But that's why I am here. I can tell you what's going on, and it's the following. This stuff here. This is the problem, okay? You want to inject the HTTP client. With pre-rendering set on, we see the actual error. But with the auto-render mode, with no pre-rendering, it doesn't work. And by the way, it's the same thing for the server render mode. When I just would try to run the interactive server render mode, pre-rendering set to false, I restart the application, it's exactly the same results, okay? This thing is missing, and that's why this app is not working. So what's the fix? Let's use auto render mode, pre-rendering set to false. Well, and the fix is simply use a service, because with a service, you can tell the controller to use the implementation of the service on the server. On the client, you can tell the service to make a web API call to the controller. But let's just do it one step after another, and then you see what I mean by that. So the very first thing we should do is create an interface, because with that interface we create a contract, and with that interface we can create as many implementations as we want, and that's the beauty of dependency injection in the end. So here now, again, I know there's a better structure. Here I create an weather forecast service interface. All right, and in here I only have one method returning a weather forecast array that could be null, and here we just say get forecasts, okay, because I'm like, oh, maybe get weather forecasts. If IntelliCode is so nice, then let's just call it get weather forecasts. Now, regarding the implementation, we say here on the client, right click and add a new item, weather forecast service. All right, now this thing here is the implements the iWeather forecast and implements the interface, of course. And now here, I want to inject the HTTP client first. I know we could use a factory for that. That's another topic. All right, I see the comments already. Jesus, chill, guys. All right. Sorry, of course. Tell me that what you want. Tell me what you want. Tell me what's better, of course. I am not the guru here who knows everything. So please tell me what you know and how to improve. I really try to improve every day. Thank you very much for that. And you should too, by the way. It's a great way to live, I think. Getting better every single day. Anyways, so here the HTTP client get from JSON async the weather forecast array, and the route again is API weather forecasts. All right, now with that we have our service implementation on the client. Of course, don't forget to register this thing here. So here now we say builder services at scoped weather forecast service, weather forecast service, like that. But now the important part is that the server needs something similar, also an implementation of the weather forecast service. So now we can use this weather forecast service in our component. So back to the weather razor, we don't need this thing anymore. Instead we say weather forecast service, weather forecast service, like that. And down here we say our forecasts are now await weather forecast service get weather forecasts, like that. All right, and as you can see now, we don't have the HTTP client here. All the HTTP stuff is done in the service, but the server now also needs an implementation of the iWeather forecast service interface. So now let's just create one. So here, put this in the root folder, add new item, weather forecast service, like that. And here we say implementing the weather forecast service. We implement the interface. And now let's have a look at our controller again. We move that stuff now to the service, right? So here, or first the service, not this one now. You really have to pay attention here. So here now we see we have our implementation to get the random weather forecasts. We return them like that, and then in the controller again we can now inject this thing. So here, private read-only iWeather forecast service, weather forecast service, generate the constructor, and here now we say our forecasts is await weather forecast service get weather forecasts, like that. And in the end we just return them. And of course we also have to register this stuff. For instance, just here, builder services at scoped weather forecast service, weather forecast service, like that. And this is here you have to pay attention, the client weather forecast service, but we want the one from the server, right? What we could do now is, for instance, do the following. We could say, instead of public, because this is a different assembly, we could just turn this into internal, like that. And when you then have a look here, you see is inaccessible due to its protection level. So what we could do is just use this one, right? So here then we have the interface from the client. This is one is public, but regarding the implementation, the client one is only available to our assembly, to our project, if you want, with the help of the internal keyword. So here now we have to add the reference for our own project, or if you want to still make it public, well, then just do the following. We add the complete namespace here, like that. Remove this, and then here we make this public again. Or of course you could also give this thing a totally different name, like client forecast service, right? Stuff like that. But this should work now as well. It is registered, and our component again is injecting the weather forecast service. So what do we expect now? When we run this, we expect that everything works in the end, because on the first render from, or using the Blazor server render mode, it is using the stuff from our server, meaning we are going to use this stuff here, right? Directly access to the service. On the server, we get the data with a little delay that is simulated. And then on the next render, when we reload the page, we want to use Blazor WebAssembly, meaning that you're actually using this service here that is actually making an API call to our controller. And our controller then, there it is, will then use the service. So one step more, let's just say. Restart the application. We see now, hopefully, yep, here it's Blazor server. We get the data, right? And now we're reloading. And WASM is used. We also get the data. So this works now, but you know what? This architecture we're using here, maybe for bigger and more complex projects, you need something else. In a clean architecture, for instance, this would look way better. And if you click on this video here on the screen, I show you exactly how to build a clean architecture for your next Blazor web app project.